As your houseplants will tell you, all plants need water to survive, even cacti living in deserts with little or no rainfall. But how do plants get their water? And how do they use it? Why do they wilt when they don't have it? In this slideshow, we'll learn about the transport of water through plant tissues because it's also linked to the transport of nutrients and minerals that spur plant growth. Most plants get the water they need through their roots, moving it from the roots to the stems to the leaves. Their roots actively seek water, deploying themselves in ways optimized to tap into the layers of soil in which water can be found. Plant species differ in how they deploy their roots. Some have tap roots that can soak up water from deep underground. Others spread their roots shallowly in large areas near the surface of the soil so that they can capture water before it trickles underground. I'm continually amazed at how shallow the root systems of many northeastern trees are. Now, plant species co-occurring in a particular water regime find their own niches, avoiding direct competition. Some will probe deeply, whereas others nearby may place their roots more shallowly. Thus, if you take a cross-section of soil in a location, you'll see a constellation of the roots of different plant species concentrated at distinct layers. Some plants, such as certain species of aloes or cacti, including our native cactus, Opuntia humifusa, may have practically no roots at all. Instead, they store water almost entirely in their leaf tissues. Now, at the outer ends of roots, water flows in through living cells, crossing their membranes and passing through pores, which are called plasmodesmata, that link one cell membrane to the next cell membrane. These cells make up the epidermis, much as our outer skin cells make up our epidermis, and some epidermal cells elongate to produce root hairs, which explore for water and further hasten water uptake. But some water also passes between cells via cell walls, crossing a no man's land called the apoplast. Now, most roots contain a speed bump to water. It's a boundary of cells called the Casparian strip. Think Casper, the unfriendly ghost. The Casparian strip is the gateway that regulates the flow of water and any chemicals that it may be carrying in solution into the interior of the root, which is called the stele. Most importantly, once water has gotten through this strip, this is a process that involves nearby cells actively pumping it through, water can't get back out again. Now the process of transporting water to the rest of the cells in the plant has begun. Once into the stele, water is free to move both within cells and between them. It passes into the vessels that together make up the xylem. Recall back to week 1 when we mentioned xylem for the first time. Xylem tubes are basically lifeless cells, functioning as straws through which to draw up water. Water can also travel laterally through xylem pores to feed tissues to the side, such as leaves, where it's used for photosynthesis. More on that a bit later on. A clever, albeit a bit cruel, experiment done a century or more ago demonstrated that the movement of water upward and sideways through the xylem is a passive process, not involving cells that were expending lots of energy to pump water around. A German botanist, Eduard Strasburger, cut down a 60-foot tall oak tree and placed its roots and trunk in a vat of acid that would kill cells along the way. Up went the water through the roots and the trunk, even though the acid was damaging the already dead xylem tubes. But when the acid got to the leaves of the tree, all water transport stopped. That meant that the leaves, and only the leaves, must be somehow involved in pulling water up through the vessels. How does that work? Plant vessels really do function like straws, with the leaves effectively sucking on the top end of them. Why do they exert this kind of suction? Well, it's because leaves have tiny pores in them, called stomata, which open up to gulp in carbon dioxide. Recall that they are doing this to capture the CO2 from the air that allows them to photosynthesize and thus cause the plant as a whole to grow. Every time those stomata open, they pull in gases, but they also lose water to the atmosphere because the air surrounding the leaf is usually much less concentrated in water than the interior of the leaf. Water just escapes out of the leaf pores in a universal process called diffusion, which you may have learned about in a high school chemistry class. This water loss is called transpiration. It goes hand in hand with photosynthesis and is often measured by plant physiologists to quantify what we call water use efficiency, the rate at which water is lost relative to the rate at which that all-important set of chemical reactions called photosynthesis is fueling the growth of plants. Plants growing in very dry environments tend to have high water use efficiency. They have to, otherwise they'd lose their precious water and die. So these species have sometimes involved new pathways of photosynthesis that enable them to capture carbon without keeping their stomata open very long or during very hot days. Leaves do wilt when they've given up more water than they can receive from the roots. They just can't maintain turgor in their cells, the concentration of water that's needed to keep their cells fleshed out and functioning. Wilting, at least at first, is an adaptive response. Leaves that are drooping in the vertical are less directly exposed to the hot, evaporating rays of the sun. Promptly water wilting plants, and chances are they will revive. Some plants even drop their leaves if they have to prevent unnecessary water loss due to transpiration. These include our deciduous species and many other deciduous species of the tropics and Mediterranean realms that experience a protracted dry season. Now, when you're sucking up water through a straw, you're supporting a cohesive column of water molecules held together by forces of chemical attraction. But when you run out of the water source, or your favorite milkshake, you suddenly make that unattractive noise of making a reverse raspberry when that column is broken. Plants do too, if their water column is broken by an embolism, an interruption of air into that continuous water column. In short plants, the probability of an embolism occurring is pretty small. In taller plants, now imagine sucking on a straw 100 feet long, the probability that a break, called cavitation, will occur increases. Take a stethoscope to a drought-stressed tree, and you can sometimes hear the popping that signals cavitation. This cavitation may limit how tall trees can grow, even though they're supported by very strong woody tissues. Now, not all water transport is totally passive. Sometimes the roots pump water into the plant, as occurs when sugar maple trees are producing maple syrup in the spring. In March, under the pressure of freeze and thaw, an awakening sugar maple tree is fast converting the starches, carried in the water it's sucking in, into simple sugars, located in that no man's land, the apoplast. By the process of diffusion, water is pouring into the roots and pushing upward, even though there are no leaves yet sucking the water up. We harvest that sugar-laden water when it passes into the xylem, and we push our spiles into those vessels. In some plant species, some minerals are actively transported into roots using energy, or some salts are actively filtered out or pushed out by plants, such as mangroves that are growing in coastal environments. Soon, we'll explore how what goes up must come down, and how leaves transport their products to the rest of a plant.